Welcome to another video. I'm Jason and today we're going to be discussing how people become property millionaires. So if you're wondering how people become property millionaires, then stick around because I'm going to be revealing exactly how they do it, and if you stick around to the end, I'll also be showing you how I use my own strategy to build my own property portfolio and how you can do the same. So when we hear about people becoming internet millionaires, ISA millionaires, and in our case property millionaires, we always ask ourselves a question, how do they do it? So without further ado, let's dive straight in. So with property, I'd say the two biggest factors are cash flow and leverage, and in particular, leveraging debt. Now, if you don't know what leveraging debt is, I'll also be explaining this in the video, and I'll also be showing you how you can do it yourself to increase your own wealth. Property investors can accumulate a number of properties by having good cash flow and reinvesting their profits from the previous property into the next one. So when starting out, you'll start out with one property and it may take you a while before you get your second, and it may take a little while to get your third. But the more properties you get, the quicker you can accumulate them and the quicker you can get your next one and the next one and the next one. So once you get to say 5 or 6 properties, you start to speed up the process because your cash flow becomes better, which means you have more money ready to invest in your next property. So let me show you this illustration. Property millionaires don't go and buy 10 properties and voila, the property millionaires. They start slow, and as you can see from this graph, the graph is very slow to begin with, but the longer it goes on, the quicker and sharper the graph rises. So if you look at the points on the graph, the time between acquiring each property becomes shorter and shorter. And this is because each property you own, your cash flow improves and your monthly revenue becomes higher, which means you can save for your next property quicker. And this is because after each property you own, your cash flow improves and your monthly revenue becomes higher, which means you can save for your next property quicker. So as you can see, it doesn't take long to acquire a number of properties if you always reinvest and have good cash flow. Now, the reason a lot of people don't become property millionaires is because they don't actually reach that point, mainly because they get used to the income from the properties and they go and spend it rather than saving and reinvesting it. And another reason people don't make it to become a property millionaire is because they lose motivation and enthusiasm. They buy 2 or 3 property investments and then they become content with them and they start to get used to the revenue they get in each month rather than reinvesting it. They become that used to having the revenue, they just stay at the point where they only ever have 2 or 3 properties. But if you want to become a property millionaire, then you have to keep going. You have to keep reinvesting your profits to your next one and your next one. You have to just keep going and going until you reach that point. When I first purchased my first property investment, it was hard work to begin with. It was then about 4 years until I was able to buy my second property. But after I bought my second property, within 2 years, I bought another 2 properties, which brings me on nicely to leverage. Leverage is another key component if you want to become a property millionaire. The guys that have built up dozens or even hundreds of properties in their empires have all used leverage to get them there. So by this, I mean they use other people's money, i.e. the banks in terms of a mortgage, or they can use investors. However they do it, they put as little as their own money into it and they extract as much money as they can out of it. Now, a lot of property millionaires use debt to leverage their own wealth, and it's certainly true that there is such a thing as good debt. Imagine the monthly mortgage payments on your investment property are say £200 and the rent that you're receiving is £500. This is giving you a £300 positive cash flow every month. So every £200 you're investing, you're getting £500 back. So this is what we mean by good debt. Now, who wouldn't want a piece of that? And another way that they leverage their money is to extract positive equity from their investments. So let's say that one of your properties has increased in value by £15,000 over the last couple of years. You can then remortgage that property and extract that £15,000 back out and obviously use that towards your next property. Now, this is something that I did with my first property, but I will give a warning that it can be dangerous if you do this on every property. And I've seen property empires crumble when the housing market crashes or takes a dip because owners ran into huge cash flow problems when the value of the properties dropped below the amount they owed. However, there is far less chance of this happening these days because nowadays lenders are asking for at least 25% deposit on each property. And the reason they ask for 25% is basically to cover their own backs. So should the housing market drop or crash, you've still got quite a big leeway. So if the property market does crash, you probably still won't go to negative equity because you've got such a big cushion with this 25% deposit which you initially put in. Whereas years ago, you could actually buy a property investment for, say, as little as 10 or even 5% deposit. So when the property crash hits, you find a lot of people are now stuck in a negative equity, and this is what causes all the problems. So far we've learned that the key is to reinvest your profits, have good cash flow, and leverage other people's money as much as you possibly can. And I also want to mention the type of properties you buy will have an overall impact on your portfolio. Savvy investors always go for properties with the highest yield. Far better buying, say, 3 lower cost houses with lower rent but they have a higher yield than buying one house that gives you more rent but has a lower yield. So for example, you could have 2 terraced houses that cost 100,000 each, and these 2 properties bring you £550 in rent per month. So that gives you £1,100 per month. Or you could have a nice 3-bed semi for 200,000, but that only brings you in £700 a month. So as you can see, your outlay is the same, but because you purchased a house with a lower yield, i.e. the £200,000 house, the cash flow is not as good as buying the 2 individual terraced houses. So as I mentioned at the start, I'll reveal my own personal strategy, which so far I've built up a portfolio of 5 properties. And basically I've used the 2 methods which I've already talked about in this video. And with my first property, I used the BTL method, which is buy, renovate, rent and remortgage. And this is a great way to get started, because what this allowed me to do was I actually purchased a property that was way below market value. It was a cheap property, so the deposit was a lot lower. I then renovated the property myself. 2 years later, I remortgaged that property and extracted most of the deposit that I put in initially. Also, I'd saved all the rent for those 2 years. Now this put me in a position where I could almost afford to just go and buy another house. So if you're just starting out, I'd recommend that you save up, buy a cheap house, renovate it yourself, rent it for 2 years, and then remortgage and extract all the money that you put in, and at the same time saved all the rent. You'll then be in a position to move to your next property. And this is how you build up a portfolio. Also have an interesting fact for you as well. Did you know that over the last 2 centuries, about 90% of the world's millionaires have been created by investing in real estate? So this alone should be a good sign to you that you should get involved in property investing. Now, if you want to become a property millionaire, then I would suggest using the methods that I've explained in this video, and also set out a clear plan. So for example, you buy your first property, say this year, and then you buy your second property in 2 or 3 years time, and then just plan it out, calculate how much you will need, how much you'll need to save for each one. And you can even calculate your cash flow from the beginning, which will help immensely towards reaching your goals of becoming a property millionaire. So I want to keep this video as short as I can. I know people haven't got time to sit around watching videos all day. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you want to see more videos on me talking about property, investing and wealth building, please hit the subscribe button, and I'll be releasing new videos every week.